Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
This will be the third of three in which we're talking about Rabbi Irving Greenberg. I promise this will be the last one. And then I am planning on going on to Heschel next week. Okay, so summary of Rabbi Irving Greenberg for what we talked about up until now, and then we're going to look back. We didn't look at any text last week. We're going to look at text again this week and what he says about prayer, because again, that's the whole purpose of this series that has gone on over 2 years now, which is looking at different Jewish thinkers with their ideas about God to see how that informs our ideas, our experience of our tefillah of prayer. So Rabbi Irving Greenberg, Jewish theologian, still alive in his 90s, just a quick review, who said that Judaism has gone through three eras. In the first era, which was the biblical era, God was very interventionist and did everything, gave commands, reward and punish, made miracles, very involved in human history. Phase two, God, through an act of tzimtzum, or self-limiting, Kabbalistic concept, God pulls back from involvement in human history and says, I am more partners with you now. I've given you instructions, and now it's up to your human interpretation to be in partnership with me, to understand how these instructions are to be carried out. That human partnership is the growth, proliferation of rabbinic Judaism, of Judaism which is interpretive of the instructions God has given. And we had the story, which I won't go over again, about the rabbis disregarding what God's opinion is through the bat kol, the voice from heaven. They say it's not in the heavens anymore. It's up to us to decide. The relationship, this was asked last week. It's a very helpful question. The relationship between God and us. What's the purpose? What are we supposed to be doing in all this? So Rabbi Greenberg's concept is it's the covenant, and in the covenant, God teaches us, I am infinite freedom, holiness, creativity, life, and it is your job as human beings to expand in the human realm life, creativity, freedom, holiness, dignity, equality. That's your job. In stage one, we enact our end of the covenant by doing what God tells us to do, biblical period. In stage two, the rabbinic era, we enact our part of the covenant by using our human interpretation. He says in partnership with God. It's not entirely clear what the partnership part is, given that the rabbis say the Torah is not in heaven. We're not listening to the voice from heaven, okay? But in his framing, God is in partnership with human beings, and we're in partnership by interpreting the revelation. And he says, this is a very important corollary for him, probably not important for purposes of our class, specifically about Siddur, but he says, and in the second phase, as part of the partnership with God, God's covenant being given over to more human action, the covenant also spreads to more people. In stage one, or phase one, it was only to the Jewish people. In stage two, the covenant starts to spread beyond the Jewish people, and he talks in particular about Christianity, early Christianity, as bearers of an interpretation of the covenant. Again, I think he would expand this to Islam also, although I don't know of any of his particular writings which say that. Meaning, the monotheistic religions which stem from Judaism, okay, we know that both Christianity and Islam stemmed from Judaism and Jewish thinking, that they are expansions of the covenant idea to more people. In stage three, which is the modern age, but the modern age isn't the 20th century. The modern age, just like, historians say modernity started with Enlightenment ideas in the, and science in the 1700s, maybe even the 1600s. You take a course on early modern Europe. It starts in the 1600s. Okay. So in the modern age, stage three, God steps back more fully does not act in human history at all. It's 100% up to human beings to to keep and further the covenant. The covenant spreads beyond the monotheistic religions to all people who are working to further human freedom, life, dignity, holiness, creativity, and equality. So very important people in the modern era are scientists, doctors, politicians, human rights workers, right? He says all of these people are enacting the human end of God's covenant with us, even if they don't speak in religious language and even if they're not aware of it, because they are fulfilling the mandate that God has given us. And he does say, in answer to another question, but yet it is very important for religious and moral thinkers to guide how this human evolving of technology is used. Otherwise, we end up with Stalinism, the Shoah, AI running amok and deciding to destroy human beings to save the planet, or, whatever is the doomsday scenarios of AI, right? So all those things can be used for good or for ill, but part of the covenant is human beings maintaining a consciousness that they are using these things essentially to do God's will, which is to enlarge the realm of human freedom, dignity, equality, holiness, life, creativity. And God has, again, in a second act of tzimtzum, more self-limiting, has totally stepped back, will not intervene, all right? So God does not cause the Holocaust. God does not cause Israeli victory in the Six-Day War. God doesn't make miracles anymore. And in doing this, and one of our participants, who isn't here at the moment, really did not like this aspect of Greenberg's thinking, this three-stage thing. But he does this I want to repeat what I said near at the end last week. He does this because he is Orthodox, and so he needs to preserve a traditional belief that God made miracles. So Mordecai Kaplan would say, there was probably no miraculous splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, so the non-supernaturalists would totally retroject their non-supernaturalist view into the past. Okay, it was always like that. The way it is now, the way we understand now, is the way we should understand how the world always really was. Whereas Rabbi Greenberg's three-stage understanding has the advantage for him of preserving a more traditional belief in the past. Okay, so some people will say, that is like a total conceptual wriggle he has to do, and it doesn't make sense to me. And I certainly understand that criticism. He would understand that criticism, but he would say, well, no, because I believe that there was a Sinai event and there was an exodus from Egypt, and God did speak to Abraham, and God was much more involved in human history. And as we said several times, Carl, I'm going to come to your question in a few moments, and as we said several times, this, of course, mirrors, I guess you could use that word, the relationship of a parent and a child, right? The parent is very involved. When the child is 5, the parent scoops the child up before they start to run into the street and says, you can't do that. I'll stop you from doing that because it hurts you. As the child grows up, the parent is more collaborative, and then at a certain point, the parent must or chooses to or should step back entirely. I have given you good teachings for Seki, not my Torah, but the teachings are for you to carry out. I can't do that anymore. And in Rabbi Greenberg's formulation in the third era, it's not that I cannot do that anymore, the way a parent would say to a child, but it's God says, I am choosing to not do that anymore. That's not how I operate in this world currently. This is your world for you to do with it. I don't do miracles anymore. And we'll come in a moment to kind of, okay, so why do we pray, and what are we praying for, and what are we praying to? And Rabbi Greenberg does have a passage about that. So we'll come to that in a moment. But first, I want to pause and just ask. I think it's pretty clear what his theory is. We've gone over it now for 2 to 3 weeks. The first week we only did the first 2 stages, and last week we did stage 1, 2, and 3, and now I just reviewed it again. Are there any other questions or comments about this, not having to do with prayer? Leave outside prayer, because I want to get to, because he has a passage where he says, so this is why I think we pray, and we're going to read that. So before that, are there any questions, comments? Paul?
The third phase, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
The third phase, is it considered to be absolutely God never intervenes?
So far, yes. God has said, I have done an act of double tzimtzum. I have stepped back. I do not intervene in human history.
So there are no miracles then.
There are no miracles so far. There are no miracles in the third era. Yes, there are no punishments sent by God in the third era. There are no rewards sent by God in the third era, right? Someone got cancer, it's not a punishment. Someone got cured from cancer, it's not a reward. Someone delayed their trip by 30 seconds and therefore they were not at the intersection when the drunk driver came through. That wasn't God's decision. They were at the intersection when the drunk driver came through. That wasn't God's decision. God says, I don't do that. I have chosen to not intervene in human history that way anymore. I guess we don't know about ever, because ever hasn't happened yet. So all I can say is so far. I think that's what he would say. Because here's what he's stuck with. I want to come back to his immersing himself in the history of the Shoah, right? And when he was in his 20s and 30s, okay? Because if you say, yes, God does intervene sometimes, then you have to answer the question, so if God intervened to do a miracle in modernity sometimes, how come God chose? Again, I'm not talking about events from today's newspaper. I'm only talking at the moment about the Holocaust during World War II. How come God chose to not save 1.5 million children during the Shoah, right? That God chose to not save them is, to Rabbi Greenberg, unthinkable. Unthinkable. Therefore, you might say, by the way, if you're critical, you can say he has boxed himself into the position of saying, in modernity, God chooses to not intervene, period. It's all up to you people. This was a human decision made by humans. I don't intervene. I think he would say, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it, well, he intervenes sometimes, but not other times. By the way, the criticism that Diane raised last week of his thinking is, well, he still wants to have it both ways by saying, well, I chose to intervene in the past with the splitting of the Red Sea, but I don't anymore in modernity, and that's because my policy has changed, right? My policy has evolved as it involves, what I do in the world. So there are still critics of his theory. He would say, well, he still says God made a choice, but it's like God made a choice that evolved over time rather than God chose not to do something in 1945, but he did choose to do something in 1967. He would say that's an inconsistency. All of modernity, God has stepped back. It's not that God is dead. He actually talks about, the Time magazine or Newsweek, whatever, God is dead cover. It's not that God is dead. It's that God has elected to not intervene in history. However, the thing I didn't mention enough, we did talk about this the first time, is he says the irony is, as God steps back from intervention, God is more and more present. I want to say that again. As God steps back from intervention over time, God is actually more and more present and accessible. So in the rabbinic era, although God does not smell the nice smoke of the sacrifice and decide to reward us with rain or withhold rain, God is present every time we acknowledge God's beneficence, because we eat a piece of bread, okay? We're more aware through prayer, beginning of the answer, through prayer and ritual, he would say, rabbinic prayer and rabbinic ritual, we are more and more aware of God's presence all the time. In biblical times, people were aware of God's presence when they went to the temple and offered a sacrifice. In the rabbinic system, we are more and more aware of God's presence all the time. 3 times a day in shul with a minyan, 100 blessings a day, modeh ani when you wake up, etc., etc., etc. Right? The laws of not cheating people in business, which are supposed to imbue all your business dealings. The laws of lashon hara, right? Evil speech, which is supposed to imbue all of the conversations that you have with your peers, right? So he would say through the rabbinic movement, we become aware, or we make God more and more present. And he would say in the modern era, because of the modern I may be sort of misquoting him, I don't know, because of the modern awareness of spirituality, what modern people call spirituality, our awareness of God is more and more present. So God intervening and doing stuff is absent, but experiencing God is more and more present. I'm going to take a look now at the text about Siddur, which I know some of you will find unsatisfying.
Avi,
Yeah.
I assume that the ultra-Orthodox pretty much would revile him.
Yes.
What about other Orthodox, like modern Orthodox? How do they see this?
I think they would say, I think most modern Orthodox, most people don't think about, as I once told you, someone responded to a talk I was giving. He said to me, yeah, I don't think most people in shul think about any of this stuff. So I can't speak for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I'm guessing many or most modern Orthodox people would say, no, God still intervenes and makes miracles. And if you said to them, what about the Shoah? They'd say, that's a hard one.
They would probably say, we can't fathom what God would do. We can't understand it.
There you go. And Rabbi Greenberg would say, that's a great evasion. And he would say, I am choosing not to evade that question. I have a solution. I have an answer. And it is an answer that is not an evasion. Your answer is an evasion. We can't fathom God's ways. It's an evasion. Okay.
One question, quick
Yep.
question.
Yes.
If not mentioning the Shoah, don't we have to mention at the same time the modern creation of Israel?
Yes, all of that. He would say God didn't do that. Humans did all of that. I said 1967, but you could say 1948. He would say human beings did all of that. God, that was not a miracle. Miracle meaning, if by miracle you mean God supernaturally intervening in human history, he would say, by the way, colloquially, you should feel free to redefine the word miracle. But if by the word miracle you mean God decides to split the Red Sea so the slaves can walk through safely, and then decides to close up the Red Sea so that Pharaoh's army is drowned and they cannot recapture the slaves, if that's what you mean by miracle, stay with me, okay? It's a long sentence. If that's what you mean by miracle, then the founding of the state of Israel is not a miracle. Because God, in the third era, God does not do miracles. So God is not responsible for things that we call miracles, and God is not responsible for why wasn't there a miracle. Again, he would say you can't have it both ways. Okay? Yeah, there is a theology that, by the way, you can have it Mike's squishy theology. I'm going to call it squishy theology. The Shoah, because we can't fathom God's ways. 1948, establishing the state of Israel. Yes, it's a miracle. Okay, I'm going to now pejoratively label that a squishy theology. Forgive me, Mike. Okay? Or you can have a Haredi theology. The Shoah is something that God allowed to happen as a punishment. And the founding of the state of Israel is a miracle, although of course, most Haredim are anti-Zionists, so they would not subscribe to the idea. They say most Haredim, would say this is changing a little bit, but traditional Haredi view is that the founding of the State of Israel was a sin, right? Because we were trying to bring the Messiah before God sent the Messiah. All right, so we're all over the map here. I want to just bring it back. I got to finish Yitz Greenberg this week so we can go on. In the third era, as God Tzimtzum calls on humans, so far it's repetition. I'm not up to prayer yet, okay? In the third era, as God Tzimtzum calls on humans to take on full responsibility for the covenant in partnership with the divine role transforms as well. As the German Christian pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer pointed out, the deity is no longer the God of the gaps, that's Bonhoeffer's phrase, to whom humans turn out of insufficiency or to explain the inexplicable. We don't understand why there was a famine. It must be God. That's what that means. Instead, God is the Lord to whom one turns out of strength, common cause, and love. Carl, this is the first answer. This line is the first line answer to your question. So what about prayer? The first line answer is, God is the Lord to whom one turns out of strength, common cause, and love. Now he's going to backtrack. And then he'll come back to that. First and foremost, despite this era's tzimtzum, God is totally with each individual in every moment and place of life, right? God is ever present. So God doesn't do miracles, yet is ever present. This is the kind of paradoxical nature of God's role in this era. Loving people, God shares joy and expands it exponentially. God elevates our spirits from the depth, raising the poor and moderating the mighty. God absorbs pain, making it more bearable. This closeness, our closeness to God, or God's closeness to us, sustains us. Quoting Psalm 23, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for God is with me. This captures it, by the way. Not, I fear no evil, because I'm asking God to rescue me from the shadow of death. But I fear no evil because God is with me. Skipping a paragraph now. God continues to guide, urge, and persuade in every moment of life. So it's God. You think God is absent because God doesn't do miracles? No. God is not absent. God continues to guide, urge, and persuade in every moment of life through Torah and memory, through human interpretation, and hidden divine agents. The heavenly voice speaks from Sinai not just daily, but at every moment, based on a midrash. We must listen and hear it from whatever source or direction it comes, meaning it might not come from your rabbi. It might come from your English professor. The human role, top of the next page. The third divine tzimtzum calls all human beings to greater partnership. That is, to intensify human activity towards Judaism's messianic goals. This is an answer to what are we supposed to do? In economics, to overcome poverty and hunger. In politics, to overcome oppression and war. In life sciences, to cure sicknesses and roll back death. In religion, to raise norms and behaviors to ideal standards, uncover new channels of connection to God, and turn to God out of human capacity, not incapacity. He would say, if you're praying to God to heal a sick person 2,000 years ago, you're praying to God out of human incapacity, right? We don't know what causes sickness or healing. God is, the Bonhoeffer quote that he quoted above, God of the gaps. This is a gap in our understanding and capability. We fill in the gap by saying God. Suffering comes from God. Oh God, relieve the suffering. Okay? That is what he would say is the thinking, understanding 2,000 years ago, not today. So again, I just want to point out, who are the Kohanim? I don't want to say the Kohanim. That's the wrong way of saying it. Who are the people enacting God's covenant in the modern era? Some politicians, healthcare workers, civil rights workers. These are people who are intensifying human activity toward Judaism's messianic goals. Geula. In modern Jewish parlance, Tikkun Olam. But as I said last week, he says, these are the goals of Geula, redemption as defined in the prophets, overcoming poverty and hunger, overcome oppression and war, cure sickness and roll back and roll back death, okay? Become more ethical and more connected to God. He would say all of these things are things that the prophets labeled aspects of Geula, redemption, messianism, getting closer to the messianic era. Anyone who is working in those avenues is, in fact, intensifying human activity toward Judaism's messianic goals. They're a good Jew, even if they don't know it, and even if they're not Jewish. He wouldn't say they're a good Jew. He would say the covenant continues to spread beyond its original confines of the Jewish people. Okay, prayer. First of all, I want to go back to that line. I'm just rereading. God is totally within each individual in every moment and place of life. Loving people, God shares joy and expands it exponentially. God elevates our spirits from the depths, raising the poor and moderating the mighty. God absorbs pain, making it more bearable. And this is the closeness that sustains us. God continues to guide, urge, and persuade in every moment of life. The heavenly voice speaks from Sinai, not just daily, but at every moment. We must listen and hear it from whatever source or direction it comes. Now, here's where we have prayer. No, wait, Mike. I want to stop. I want to read about prayer. Asterisk paragraph on the second page. As humans become increasingly capable, prayer shifts from dependency, requesting supernatural interventions, toward expressing relationship, gratitude for life, and wonder at creation. Prayer becomes the invocation of the powerful, not the plea of the powerless. I'll read that again. Prayer becomes the invocation of the powerful, not the plea of the powerless. In other words, I'm going to pause before I go on and read some more. I think Yitz would say, prayer isn't for you to say, oh God, please do this. Prayer is for you to say, God, I know it's up to us. Please help me in this endeavor and be with me as I seek to do X. Okay? I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to go on. As humans become, at the asterisk, as humans become increasingly capable, that means the third era, third age, prayer shifts from dependency, requesting supernatural interventions, toward expressing relationship, gratitude for life, and wonder at creation. So prayer is about, wow. I'll start with the end of that sentence. Wow. Thank you. And here's what I'm supposed to do in my relationship with the people around me. That's what prayer is for. It becomes the invocation of the powerful, not the plea of the powerless. Now I'm going to go on. The surgeon does not ask God to zap an incurable malignancy with a magical reversal of nature, but prays, may God guide my hand. The oncologist prays, may I grasp how to work with this patient's immune system to destroy the invader. The scientist prays, may I uncover and rightly apply all the miraculous properties in matter. The political leader prays, may I halavai, I'd like to add. Halavai. The political leader should pray, may I calculate responsibly, aware of my limitations and accountability, and marshal the needed resources to ensure victory for life and human dignity. Okay? Which means we pray out of awareness of God, gratitude towards God, wowness towards the world that God has created, and asking God to accompany us as we seek to carry out the mission of spreading and enacting covenant, big fancy word, instantiating the Messianic age, making the Messianic age more present, okay? That's my job, and I ask God for help, support, and partnership in me doing my job that God has assigned to me. That's, I believe, now you may or may not like the answer, but I believe that's the answer about why we pray. So when we say, Rifa'enu Hashem ve'erafeh, heal us God and we will be healed, what I'm really saying is, My wife had a knee replacement 4 months ago. She still has pain. May the medicines can help her. May her doctor and PA and physical therapist continue to work on giving her more strength. And wow, the natural healing process is an amazing thing, and may it continue so that she continues to get better. I am not saying, God, please go poof and take her knee pain away. Because if you can go poof for the 10 plagues, surely you can go poof for my wife's knee. Or as Tevye said, is that too much to ask, right? To which the answer, God's answer to Tevye would be, oh, yeah, I don't do that anymore. Okay, I'm going to pause. Carl, is there still a hand up? Still a comment on this?
Yes, I like what you've explained and what he's proposed, but it certainly suggests that we need to rewrite many of our prayers from a asking God perspective to a asking for godliness or
yeah, right. Good. So I will comment on that very briefly. That is a very good thought, question statement. I will comment on it very briefly. One, some people have rewritten some of the prayers. Two, as I said many moons ago, I might have said it for the last time, maybe 2 years ago in this class. There are, I can't remember, I think 5 ways or something like that I enumerated of what do you do about a prayer whose words you no longer agree with? You could say it and not think about it. You could say it in Hebrew but write something different in English. You could say it in a traditional way but interpret it differently, because much of religion is an act of interpretation anyway. By the way, even for the rabbis, when they say Hamotzi lecha min haaretz, they know that bread doesn't come out of the ground. They know that humans make bread. What they're saying is, we acknowledge you, God, that you set in motion forces of creation, that we then in partnership with you get grain from the ground, we cut it, we mill it, we put yeast and water in it, and we make bread, which I am about to eat right now. Thank you for your role in it. So it's always been in, again, I think traditional Jews will say, religion is always an act of interpretation about language. Okay, that was number 3. Number 4 was, I change the words when I daven privately, but I don't change the words when I'm leading as a chazan. That was number 4. I don't remember. There's like a number 5 and number 6. Ways of like, how do you deal with thoughts in the Siddur that you say, I don't necessarily literally believe this? I've also said to people, by the way, feel free to make up your own prayer or read your own poem about, by the way, I believe this is halachically permitted, according to me. I'm guessing it would be halachically permitted according to most conservative rabbis. Okay? You could say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Yotzer or uvorei choshech, Oseh shalom uvorei hakol. Then you could read some Marge Piercy poem about creativity in the world and the things that grow, and you could say, Baruch atah Hashem Yotzer hameorot. And you have fulfilled your responsibility to say the first blessing of the Shema. Okay? And we've talked at length, in the past about, various, let's call it troublesome passages, second paragraph of the Shema, the line in the Aleinu, thank you for not making us like the other people, that there are ways that some people have erased those, right? The Reform movement does not have a second paragraph of the Shema, nor do they have tzitzit. It's the first paragraph, and then it goes to Leman, it goes to, the last 2 lines of the third paragraph of Shema. So one way is just skipping it, and the other way is, I reinterpret it. In fact, as Jews have always reinterpreted, right? So does Baruch atah Hashem mechayei hametim mean God will resurrect the dead in the future time? Or does it mean God is responsible for the circle of life in which energy is neither created nor destroyed, matter is neither created nor destroyed, and our absent loved ones are somehow, in ways in which we don't fully understand, always with us? Is that what mechayei hametim means? So the Reform movement said, I can't stomach that metaphoric interpretation, because that's not what mechayei hametim means. And so I changed it to Mechaye HaKol, because I just can't say that. Other people say, no, I say Mechaye HaMeitim, but I don't necessarily literally mean resurrection of the dead in the end times. Other people say Mechaye HaMeitim because even if the bodies aren't resurrected, the soul always exists. Other people would say I can say Mechaye HaMeitim because there's a circle of life. Matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. And by the way, the person who said, I don't think people in shul think about it all that much, those people say, oh, I say Baruch Atah Hashem Mechaye HaMeitim, and I don't know, who knows? So there are a variety of ways of dealing with passages that one thinks you don't want to have them mean what it seems to mean, and we should change the words is one of those ways. And there are other ways. Yep.
I'll just leave, I guess, with the thought that, yes, it's possible to interpret, and that's a good thing, and we can all engage in it, but to continue to perpetuate prayers that were developed from a significantly different perspective or mindset of an activist God.
Yep. Yes.
At some point, wouldn't it be better to rewrite this to the new perspective? And like the Reconstructionist prayer book did rewrite stuff. The Reform prayer book did rewrite stuff.
Correct. So I'm going to say, here's what I'm going to say. They rewrote stuff, and they balanced that with the integrity of structure, because we all know that the other part is, this party line that we always say, I can walk into any shul anywhere if I'm a davener, I can walk into any shul anywhere in the world, I can find my place in the Siddur and I can figure it out. And it wouldn't work if we said, I, Avi Havivi, am the Shliach Tzibur this morning, and I will treat you to my leading of all the prayers that I have written, which are A, you've never heard of, because I wrote them, B, are very meaningful to me personally, but you might totally disagree with me, but hey, I'm speaking honestly from the heart to God. Too bad, so sad. The other 9 of you can just sit there and listen. Okay, so I'm just saying, Carl, yes. So, but there's a balance. So the Reconstructionists said, and the Reform, by the way, they said we don't do Musaf because we don't pray for restoration of sacrifices, and we don't believe that. So we're not going to reinterpret it, right? I have an Israeli Masorti Siddur, which has in Musaf in the middle when we say about sacrifices, and it says, they say, and restore us to Jerusalem where we will live in harmony and fulfill the words of the prophet. You prefer deeds and not sacrifice. So that's what it says in the conservative Masorti Israeli Siddur, whereas the Reform and the conservative, they say, let's just do away with Musaf altogether, right? There are different ways of squaring the circle, Do we say we shave off a little, or do we say, no, it doesn't fit in the circular hole, so I've got to find a square hole. I'm going to make a square hole. There are different ways of doing that. And by the way, when I go to I will refer to them as from-ish, from leaning, Reform or Reconstructionist minyanim, okay? Meaning they're a little bit more awareness of traditional Jewishness. I get such a kick out of this. They say, okay, we're going to hum a nigun now, bimkom musaf, in place of musaf, and those who feel the need to say musaf can, go ahead and stand up and say musaf while we're humming a nigun, right? So they hum a nigun, and they're like, 5 people in the room who are saying musaf to themselves. There's no public musaf, but we don't take away your opportunity to say musaf. We're letting you say musaf on your own, and we're going to sing a nigun. So, again, I just want to say there are a lot of different ways of squaring the circle here. So I will leave your question stand as an excellent one and say there are a variety of ways of responding to that. But I want people to sort of mull over, I guess, the phrase of prayer becomes the invocation of the powerful, not the plea of the powerless, and prayer shifts in our era from dependency, requesting supernatural interventions, please God do this, please God do that. Prayer shifts from that toward expressing relationship, gratitude for life, and wonder at creation. Okay, no more yits in our class. We will move on to Heschel next week. Be Torah and stay healthy. I have a cold, but Baruch Hashem, it's not COVID. And all right, Michael, you're going to go end the meeting.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.